My guest today is John Kelly, a filmmaker specializing in animation. Now, his newest animated short, Retirement Plan, co-written with Tara Lawall, was inspired by his own possible midlife crisis. Now, John studied at the Royal College of Art in London and lives and works in Dublin, Ireland, where he is developing a number of projects that explore a similar line between tragedy and absurdity, including a feature-length animated documentary. So let's welcome filmmaker and animator John Kelly and his new animated short film, Retirement Plan, to the show. Welcome, John.
Thanks so much for having me, Ward. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So when did you get into animation?
A long time ago, I started out as a graphic designer, which probably shows in my work. So I trained in my undergrads and then worked as a graphic designer, designing kind of logos and annual reports. And then a friend of mine had a band and asked me if I wanted to do a music video. And I made a very sort of DIY music video, and the excitement of being able to make something on my computer and not rely on a printer or sending it out to someone else. Basically, I'm control freak, like a lot of animators. That allowed me to kind of play a little bit more. And so I returned to college, did a master's at the Royal College, as you mentioned. Um, and then when you leave there, you basically leave as an animation director. So since then, I've been working in the
Oh,
animation industry.
fantastic. Well, how did you come up with the idea for Retirement Plan?
I mean, as you can probably guess from the film, I'm a kind of a list guy. It is a sort of a list film. But I was on a short haul flight, and I had what you might call a panic attack. It started out like I had no internet, as you do on airplanes, and I thought I'd do a few emails, and I have about 70,000 emails in my inbox, 5,000 flagged, which is probably anxiety inducing already to a lot of your followers. And I suddenly became aware of all the lists in my life. Um, my Netflix has dozens of films in the to watch list. I have a Spotify folder with albums to listen to, but now I'm up to a playlist called To Listen to 24. And my internet reading list goes back like a few decades. And I suddenly, I kind of thought to myself, when on earth will I have time to do all of these things? Maybe when I retire. And that started me thinking about all the things I want to do now, that I could do when I retire. And it seemed like the basis for the very kind of germ of an idea for a short film.
Yeah, the whole film is completely thought provoking, and those going through a midlife crisis always kind of intrigued me because are they doing something they think they've always wanted to do and may not be able to do when they get older, so they do it now? Or is it basically the second coming of sowing their wild oats? So I've always wondered why people choose to go through a midlife crisis or if the midlife crisis actually chooses them. But in your film, Ray's life starts out, like you said, wanting to do the things he should already be doing, such as replying to the emails he flagged, cleaning up his desktop, and reading all of the saved articles, or like you said, uh, taking some time to listen to all of the saved albums on Spotify, for example. When I looked at this, I was like, when I retire, I don't want to be doing any of that. So, I have thousands of flagged emails, but they've all been answered. So I don't have to worry about that. And I don't like a scattered desktop. So I try to keep that down to a minimum. So, but I love the whole list in this film because it gets the audience to actually start thinking about their own life.
Yeah, My wife is training to be a psychotherapist, and one of the things you learn about is pluralistic psychotherapy. So pluralism being where you come at something from like an infinite number of angles, and we kind of talked about this film being a sort of a pluralistic approach. And I don't think everyone will relate to every single thing, but some of the shots are 2 seconds, a 1 second. It's a lot crammed into 7 minutes. So hopefully there's something in there that people connect to. And it's sort of underpinned by an emotional journey. I think it becomes kind of clear over the course of the story that it's
It
sort of
does.
a
Yeah,
human propensity, not exclusive to male, but kind of often male, to kind of try and uh, face emotional problems in your life by fixing things or ticking things off. Um, so that was interesting to me.
yeah, it was because as I watched the film, I learned by watching it that we shouldn't be waiting until retirement to live life because all of the things that Ray was listing in this film, he could have been doing right now. And I think, and I know a lot of people have the mindset of living life now, trying new things. And then there's others who feel that, well, I don't have time to do that. I'll do them when I retire. And so I always wondered, do they ever get to do those things when they retire? I believe that we do need to embrace new things while we're still young enough to learn and still have the ability to apply it, like learning a new language or a musical instrument, which those two things get very hard to do when you're older.
Well, yeah. And that happens to the character in the film. Age gets in the way of some of these things, doesn't it? I think we're also kind of, unlike any generation before us, we've got more choice than ever. And even if the choice was there in previous generations, we're more exposed to it, through social media or factual TV, or so I think that ends up with us kind of, well, me personally, I can only speak for myself, but I have this kind of feeling of sometimes, being aware of all these things I should be doing or watching or feeling, that kind of FOMO.
Yeah, but it was funny because when the thing that I noticed was the first things Ray mentions in the film are the things that, for a lot of us, waste our time. Because I know the first three things he mentioned has to do with it was email, it was the desktop, and so there was this instant connection to either our computer or to our smartphone. And a lot of times people don't know how to manage their time, and those things become things that will waste our time. And before we know it, a year has passed and we haven't done anything but spend time on those devices. So I thought it was interesting that when the list started, it started with those very things.
Yeah, definitely. I think our intention, myself and Tara, when we were writing it, was we knew we wanted things to unravel at the end. But in order for things to kind of go off the rails, they have to start very firmly on the rails. And I think like animation has this ability to be a sort of a Trojan horse, for kind of deeper subtexts. And humor as well is obviously a useful tool in that regard. So we wanted to deliberately start with really kind of broad, kind of relatable, kind of digital age, things that a lot of us would connect to. And also kind of the style, like everything, the kind of cinematic approach, to the scenes was very kind of, presented in a kind of a almost diagrammatic way. And then, but then as the kind of the story arc progresses and the character sort of devolves and things kind of fall off track, things get more specific. He talks about sort of fighting someone or killing a fish or driving a bus, and not all of these are. Some of them are so incongruent, and the visuals are suddenly jumping. We're changing kind of from wide lens to long lens, and the colors and night to day. The intent was to kind of have that disorientation, but then that upfront section to kind of ground it in normality and ease you into the rhythm of it.
Yeah, but in the end, the overall film for the audience becomes very focused because the audience subconsciously is waiting on the next thing on the list that Ray's going to mention. And everything that's listed, there are things that many of us relate to, and there are those that we won't like. I could care less about ever driving a bus. I mean, I've driven a 40-foot motorhome before, so that's like driving a bus. So that's nothing new for me. But there's everything in this film is going to touch an audience member. And the other thing is, people as a whole have a very strange outlook when it comes to mortality, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that we don't think about that much. Um, I've got a neighbor that runs a death cafe. She's sort of a lovely elderly woman, and it's lots of women, men and women of a certain age that get together and talk about death. And I was invited. I should go. I haven't gone yet. It would have been perfect research for this, but um, yeah, it's death and taxes are the inevitabilities, but it's not something that we want to dwell on. And clearly, it's something that Ray is also not dwelling on in this film, because at a certain point, you know, it's a Cisse approach up front. You're seeing exactly, you know, what he's saying in the narration in this sort of stream of consciousness. But then at a certain point, there's sort of a separation, and Tara had written all these lovely lines like, "I will move to a town by the sea. I've always wanted to live by the sea." And when she wrote that, I think she had thought of it as this is what we'll be seeing. But at a kind of a last minute twist, as I was putting together the animatic, I thought it'd be fun to be like when he says, "I'll move to a town by the sea," that we're seeing him in a retirement home. And then I will learn to speak another language. And then he's sitting with lots of elderly people, suddenly finding himself, one person sort of unable to talk, another person blabbering. The experience when you visit these places, sometimes it's unpredictable. And so, yeah, having that sort of the most fun aspect for me was the editing of it and trying to kind of have that unraveling, have that disconnect happen effectively and kind of creep up in you slowly.
Yeah, because there's so many little nuances in this film that people need to pay attention to. Because as the list is going on, the animation is going along with it, and I love the animation because there's this movement of the lines, so to speak, and it keeps your attention because there's this constant moving. It's like life; it never stops. And as you take Ray towards the end, it's almost like watching the sands in an hourglass run out. And so I got to thinking about that, and so many people live with shoulda, coulda, and woulda. And then when the time comes, many face the elements of aging, illness, loss, or the possibility of being a caregiver or one being cared for. And when those things happen, all those things you dreamed about doing in retirement will never be fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. And the film kind of connects with audiences in different ways depending on maybe how close they are or how far past they are retirement. But also, kind of friends of mine have said it makes them think about their own retirement, but also, watching their father sort of struggling with retirement. It's not, there is kind of retirement training, and some people try and stay busy for it, but it's looked on as this sort of big giant holiday, but actually it's it's a huge turning point in your life.
Yeah, because people are so geared to being in a routine. Many look forward to retirement. Many people have plans for retirement, but those that finally retire, they wake up one morning and there's this whole, it's not even a physical transition, it's a mental transition to try to figure out, what do I do now? How can I be productive with my time? I don't want to be sitting around in front of the TV set 24 hours a day. So for some, it's like they're all of a sudden they're a fish out of water.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think like my career is sort of um freelance, so I'm kind of jumping from different job to different job. But I know, speaking to a father of a friend of mine who retired recently, and he was in the same job for sort of 40 years, going into the same office. That was a huge change for him, to go from that to suddenly being at home with his wife, and the two of them kind of faced with each other suddenly full time.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that even for those that are still married, I think retirement actually really tests the marriage because now they're looking at each other all day long. So, you've already had this film shown at a film festival like Galway. What was the audience's reaction to it? And what were some of the questions that they asked?
Yeah, it was really enjoyable to watch it with an audience, because it's sort of like when I'd written the script originally, I sent it to Tara, who's a good friend. We've worked together on sort of advertising projects and things. She's an amazing copywriter, and she took kind of bones of what I'd written and made it like 20 times funnier. And then obviously Donal's performance made it, next level funny. And so watching it with an audience, they they were laughing, in all the right places, which is a big relief. But then at a certain point, when kind of this sort of start moment kicks in and the tone changes, everyone went like totally quiet. And it's hard, it's a very heightened experience when you watch your work with an audience, because you're tuning into, a couple of hundred people's reactions in a very acute way. It completely changes how you perceive the work, especially for someone like me that kind of constantly tries to kind of mirror people. And uh, and then this moment is kind of broken, without giving too much away, by this sort of big kind of funny moment after the sad moment. And you could just sense this sort of release in the audience. Everyone laughed, and it was a huge relief, because you've no idea how it's going to play. You don't know if sometimes a film that's 4 minutes suddenly feels like an eternity. But this film, which is 7 minutes, luckily we kind of got the editing right, and the music is a beautiful soundtrack that kind of carries you through it, metronomically. So it sort of landed with the audience. Um,
So
but
how
yeah,
does
we've
it?
had, yeah.
No, go
Sorry, go
ahead.
ahead. Well, just the reactions have been kind of um, really positive, and a lot of people crying and laughing, and crying, laughing, which is sort of the dream response.
Well, since it, I guess it premiered at Galway. Does that now make you feel better when the film moves on to other festivals like South by Southwest?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's quite Dublin centric. We kind of subtly snuck in a lot of like Irish, architecture of Dublin suburban houses inside and outside. And also, there's the Irish countryside, Connemara, and there's a swimming spot, the 40 foot. But I think there's so much specificity in there that it does become kind of, you feel something about it feels authentic, that hopefully it'll also connect with an American or an international audience.
Well,
But yeah,
it
so
connected
excited
with
to watch it.
me. Yeah, it
Oh,
connected
good.
with me. So I think it's going to connect here. especially at South by Southwest. So, how did you come to cast Domhnall Gleeson as the voice of Ray?
He so he lives in Dublin. He's obviously sort of a incredibly talented, internationally renowned actor from Star Wars and Harry Potter and Ex Machina and stuff. So we were definitely aiming high, but the advantage was that I knew he did live in Dublin, and practically speaking, recording a voiceover isn't a huge commitment for an actor compared to live action. So, you know, ultimately it was just a 2 hour recording. Um, but getting him involved, I I tend to do kind of video pitches. So when I applied for funding for the Irish to Screen Ireland for the film, I made a little video. And so when I did approach Donal's agent, I made him a video, and he has like amazing kind of uh, range. He's known for probably a lot more his dramatic work, but he's also an incredibly good kind of comedic actor. He used to be in a sketch show here in Ireland called Your Bad Self. There's a few incredible sketches from kind of his early 20s that you can find on YouTube, but he doesn't do a lot of comedy these days. But I knew that he'd be able to bring that kind of breadth of uh, drama and absurdity and tragedy and silliness to it. And luckily he was up for it.
So, which came first, the animation or the voiceover?
So my process is that I draw the storyboards first, and I'll use my voice as a kind of a rough temp track. But these are literally, you call them kind of chicken scratches. They're like super rough storyboards, and we shared that with him, and then he recorded the voiceover, and then we animated that after. And so we were definitely inspired by his performance. He added a lot of, he's an amazing writer and director himself. So there was a few things that he ad-libbed. Like there's one line, I think, where at one stage the character is camping and there's like a tent that's collapsed and it's wrapped around a tree and the wind's blowing. And the line that we had in there was, camping is awful. And he made a very slight tweak. He just said, camping is horrible. And it just sounds so much better coming from from his voice. So he really kind of he got the arc, and so that prompted us to approach it from design and lighting and action point of view to try and match that kind of high watermark of his
Well,
performance.
his tone was amazing because it
Yeah,
was
no, yeah,
soft enough where the audience pays attention to every line. And
yeah,
he kept
yeah,
it consistent from beginning to end. So it was
absolutely.
very, very impressive. Now, how did you come up with the actual animation design?
Yeah, it's funny. Like um with animation, I think like with animation, craft is important, but particularly in animation. But this was sort of an attempt to take execution out of the equation. I think sometimes with animation, it can get in the way of storytelling. And so with this film, I kind of forced myself to work within fairly strict parameters. A consistent sort of line thickness, limited color palette, and a static camera. Like often, because anything's possible in animation, sometimes you're drawn to making stories about sort of robots and talking babies and having cameras flying everywhere. And I love all that stuff, and I'm guilty of doing all of that um, in the past. But I think for this film, because we had so many shots, and you know, I think it's over 100 shots in 7 minutes. We really felt like, okay, I had to kind of put some strict parameters on it. And so it's a very stripped back art style, very kind of if it was a film, it would be, a low budget documentary, probably type approach, kind of fly on the wall, where you're just observing a scene and letting it unfold. And the drama comes from the kind of pace of it and how the character evolves.
Well, yeah, because one of the things that I noticed on the animation was how the movement of all of the lines of the animation was constant and it was consistent. And I also noticed the color palette. So, what type of color palette did you go with? Because it is a muted tone.
Yeah, we sort of, I think it's probably, I'm inspired by live action film and portrait photography. A big fan of listen to a lot of podcasts like yours, and also like Roger Deakins, cinematographer, has an incredible podcast, and that just made me think about how color and lighting can influence the mood of a film. And so the color, we really wanted it to help you kind of get inside this character's head, so it's kind of bright and airy and exterior at the beginning, and then as it gets more claustrophobic and darker, and um, as the film progresses and the paranoia sort of kicks in. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't think you, I don't think you notice those aspects individually, but kind of cumulatively, they hopefully add up to the overall mood.
they do. They do. So, from how long did it take to go from storyline to creating the animation to a finished film?
And it was about sort of 8 months in total. My design process was about 6 months, drawing every scene, storyboarding, and then drawing them. And then the animators, Mara and Eamon, incredible pair of Irish animators based about an hour south of me, working remotely. They animated it all in about 3 months, and they used quite a like an innovative pipeline, which allowed us kind of to. It's a piece of software called Moho, which is sort of relatively new in terms of use for this kind of thing, but it had a huge amount of flexibility with it.
Yeah, I really enjoy the animation. Um,
Oh, nice.
the voiceover worked so well. His tone was perfect, and the whole film was consistent. And I know that the audiences will, as you have already seen, will pay close attention from beginning to end. And I know I mentioned it earlier that you premiered at the Galway Film Festival. You're going to be screening at the Dublin International Film Festival as well as South by Southwest. Those are some very prestigious film festivals. How does it feel to have your film at those venues?
Oh, it's so exciting. We've got about sort of 15 screenings lined up over March and April, including about um, nine Oscar qualifying festivals. So yeah, we're really, really excited to hear how it'll go down. And also kind of, it's not just animation festivals, which is kind of exciting. It's moving beyond that to, a few other festivals we're not allowed to announce yet, but yeah, really excited.
Well, that's great because I know that there are film festivals that cater to certain genres. There's those that are animation only. There are those that are horror only. But I know with all of the great prestigious film festivals, they have all of the different blocks, and it's always wonderful to see the filmmakers. They get accepted to places like Galway, or they get accepted to places like South by Southwest, which is a very big deal. And so it's so great to see. And especially with the overall audiences, with all of these screenings you have lined up, what do you hope the audience will get from the film?
Well, yeah, I think my goal is to leave you thinking. I suppose the work that I'm drawn to has some kind of impact emotionally and visually, but also just sort of stays with you a little bit afterwards. So I'm hoping that the audiences will uh, will remember it.
They will. I know I have. I mean, ever since I watched the film a few times, and it got me thinking. Like, like there's certain areas of your life you're like, I need to live a bit more doing such and such, and stop putting it off because time passes very quickly, and it's the only thing we can't stop. We can stop the things that we're doing, or we can start doing the things we want to do, but time never slows down and never waits. And this is a film that gives us all of that. So I understand that you're also working on a full length animated documentary. Are you allowed to maybe mention about what that could be?
Yeah, I've got. I think it's one of these things where we developed a sort of a new animation pipeline for to make this, uh, and it's I found a kind of a new way of working in terms of how I write and how I storyboard and everything. And so by the time we had sort of delivered this, it sort of felt like I was only just on the first step of a kind of a mountain that I'm very keen to climb, to use a labored analogy. But so I've got about 11 things of various kind of shapes and sizes, feature film, fictional feature film, to animated, everything animated in this sort of rough sort of style, more or less.
Yeah,
But they all have a kind of a mix, as I say, of this sort of happy, sad, tragedy, and absurdity, the kind of thing I enjoy watching myself.
I like that. I love documentaries. I've seen documentaries that, it's a cross between live action, and then they use animation as certain fillers to link the live action sections together. I would love to see a full length animation, a full animated documentary, which I think would be so interesting to watch. So I'm interested
Absolutely.
to see what you come up with next. But I know that this film retirement plan is going to keep you busy this year. And but ladies and gentlemen, in the throes of his overstimulated, energy poor midlife, Ray, voiced by actor Domhnall Gleeson, fantasizes about everything he'd love to do in retirement once he finally has the time. Now, John Kelly's touching and funny animated short is, well, it's a meditative stream of possibilities on the beauty, the curiosities, and the fears that we wish to embrace when we are confronted with an escalating awareness of our own finite mortality. Now, Retirement Plan made its premiere at the Galway Film Festival and will be screening at the upcoming Dublin International Film Festival and South by Southwest in Austin, Texas in March. That's not too far from where I'm at. And John, thank you so much for sharing your absolute delightful animated short retirement plan with me today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Ward. Cheers.
You're very welcome. And as for me, ladies and gentlemen, you're either going to see me at the movies or from the red carpet.